Welcome to the latest Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. Rob Staton and Jeff Simmons here. We've got a lot to get into, Jeff. It has been a while, and there's a lot going on as we kind of head in towards the interesting part of the off-season. So today we saw Clint Kubiak have his introductory press conference. He was sat next to Mike McDonald. Before we get into some other things, what was your impression of Kubiak and McDonald in that press conference?
I'm glad I did my homework. I know you've done some homework on Kubiak because he was pretty much described as everything I was told. I was warned by some people who know him that he's kind of a low energy, dry, a lot like his dad. I don't know if you ever heard his dad interview. His dad was on 710 a couple weeks ago, and he was a little more relaxed now. When he was a coach, he was just a dry, kind of sarcastic. And you're obviously looking for, like, who's going to, like, you heard Waldron speak for years and Ken Norton. You're like, God, these guys were boring. I interviewed Gary Kubiak a couple times when I was writing, and, like, it was like hearing, like, an AI version of, like, himself. Like, even his face kind of looked like a computerized version of, like, a young Gary. It was kind of freaky. But, like, I'm glad I was warned and prepared because I might have been a little underwhelmed, or it might have been like, my God, this guy is dry. But if you ever heard Kyle Shanahan speak, who's kind of his mentor of the family in the business, I thought Mike was a lot more interesting than Kubiak was. Kubiak, you've done your homework on him. He pretty much came as advertised. The things he talked about that he mattered, the zone blocking, the guys he hired, the things he talked about, obviously the Geno thing, but he's going to say that anyway. He's kind of worked with Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr, and Geno's a similar kind of quarterback to those two guys in terms of, like, their skill set and talent. Nothing really surprised me. Like, it was interesting they barely mentioned Tyler Lockett by name. I think that was pretty telling. I wish people dug a little deeper on the offensive line questions that I would have been asking. I think the staff people they brought in are exactly who we would have guessed they brought in. Like, Rick Dennison's a guy that was Gary Kubiak's right-hand man, was with him in New Orleans. They said they have more staff to come. I wonder if that's one, but it was pretty much as advertised. I think, like, Mike was very thorough in who they wanted. I think they got the guy they wanted. You can see why. You can see why Mike's excited. It ties really well, but I don't think this guy's like the Sean McVay who's going to take over the room. Or I'm sure we all could have got behind, like, the Grant Udinski story. It sounds great, but sometimes the boring, plain offensive coordinator like Norv Turner and Gary Kubiak, sometimes that works. And so he was dry as hell. He was not. I don't think he said anything remotely interesting other than, like, personnel stuff, but he sounded self-assured. He sounded confident in what he wants. And I think the more I hear and more that I learn, like, it's easy to understand why Mike, after a thorough search, ended up there.
I thought he sounded so like Kyle Shanahan. It was unbelievable. That was what I kept thinking. I was listening in the car on the way home from work, and I thought, I'm not seeing the screen because I'm driving, but I can hear the words, and I can just imagine this being a San Francisco 49ers press conference. That's what he sounded like. And I didn't have any massive takeaways from it. I think the zone blocking stuff is something I want to talk about because that was an interesting angle to it. But I was gonna save this for later, but I'm just gonna jump straight into this topic, Jeff. And if people have got questions, if you want to join in, super chat, and we will put them up on the screen and we will answer any questions or show any points that you want to make if you're super chatting. So on the Geno thing, I think you're absolutely right that what should people realistically expect from anybody to say, given last year they were so non-committal to Geno Smith, and it was just a huge talking point for 12 months. And they must be aware that everybody on the internet was talking about that. Just as they were talking, as we were all talking about John's line on overpaying and overdrafting offensive linemen, I kind of feel as if in the PR media world of the Seahawks, they're very well aware of that. So they were always, I think, going to try and avoid a similar scenario. However, they have been so unequivocal in their Geno's the guy. I've come here to work with Geno. This is the kind of guy I want to coach, was one of the things that Kubiak said, because he wins games in the fourth quarter. It would be extremely hard now, Jeff, I think, to say all of these things and then trade him in the next 2 weeks. So I think what we can safely say is that Geno Smith is going to be the Seattle Seahawks starting quarterback. And now it's a case of getting a deal done. I wrote an article today, Jeff. I think part of this messaging is to almost say to Geno's camp, we want you to be here. We're being public about our support and belief in you. Let's get this done. And I think they've decided that's what they need to say publicly to get a compromise agreement. I think they will get one. I think you and I have probably felt that's the way it's going to go for a long time. I also think there's another thing, though, Jeff. I think this is going to be, I think you're going to hear even more praise about Geno Smith, because I think they want every team to believe they're going to draft the quarterback. I think they will draft one. I could be wrong. I have been wrong. It's been known. But I think they are going to draft a quarterback. Now, I'm going to come back to drafting quarterbacks later, Jeff. But does that make any sense that their messaging is also, that's why they're backing Geno, because they think that will help get the deal done, and also it can be a smokescreen for the draft.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. When you were saying it, it kind of just popped in my brain. And John's very particular with his words and the messaging he wants from his team. Like, some people thought the overdrafted and overpaid thing was because they wanted to draft J.C. Latham. Some people thought they were connected. I think it was you that put that together. I think when they really want someone, they talked about how they didn't talk to Russ and they didn't talk to other guys. I think that's part of John, specifically his MO of how he does things. So I would not be surprised if that was the messaging, because at first I'm like, well, I wonder if John's hating this because he's trying to negotiate with these guys. But I wonder if that's just the organizational philosophy. I imagine John's been wanting to draft the guy for quite some time. The draft has not lined up a lot. We've talked about this. I'm guessing they're going to take a shot somewhere. I don't know where. I don't know if it's second round, third round, fourth round. There's going to be quarterbacks in that zone. I would not be surprised if that was part of their organizational thinking.
We will come back to this. I want to go back to what Kubiak was saying about the offensive line. It's pretty clear that this is going to be outside zone. I mean, he's pretty much stated that. He did say that they would tailor the offense blocking scheme around the players that they have. But Jeff, I think it's on the one hand encouraging that they know who they are and what they're going to be. I think that's been a little bit muddled in the last few years because they've had, an offensive. We've talked about this, an offensive line that has both Anthony Bradford and Charles Cross on it. They're not really stylistically the same. Connor Williams and Austin Blythe next to Anthony Bradford equally is a bit of a weird mix. So do you want to be power, gap, strong, mauling, or do you want to be athletic, zone blocking? Like, pick one and go with it. So they're picking zone blocking. I'm not blown away by that idea, Jeff. I think if you want to be Mr. Physical, run the ball coach, I think physical gap scheme makes the most sense. I don't think the Ravens and the Steelers are going to try and finesse anybody in the running game anytime soon. The Ravens generally take big offensive linemen. Steelers do. Yeah. So I'd be more inclined to go that way. But they've chosen, and they're going to go for it. Now, the point I was going to put to you is, I was going to say today, and I've changed mine in the last 10 minutes. I was going to say to you, I think as a fan base, we will overreact to this. That we're now going to spend the next 2 months saying they're not going to draft this guy because he's not zone blocking, or they're going to draft this guy because he's athletic, or stuff like this, and that we'd probably go a bit over the top. And the example I was going to use was the one we've talked about, Talias Fuaga being drafted in the first round by the Saints, who did not. He was big, physical, mauling. He was athletic, but that's how he was. And just before I jumped on, I looked at his blocking grades in his last year at Oregon State. As a zone blocker, 91.3 grade. Yeah. So an elite grade. And as a gap blocker, 78.9. So good in both, but especially good as a zone blocker. So I actually thought, well, if I'm going to come here and say we're going to overreact to this because they took Tally, that's a rubbish point, because he is actually an elite zone blocking lineman for Oregon State. So maybe, Jeff, we should just be looking at who can block well in the zone blocking system, because that's what they said they want to do.
Yeah, historically, they've put a lot of emphasis on their O-line coach in terms of the kind of players they draft. There was a big gap in terms of the kind of players they were drafting at the end of the Tom Cable era, which we don't get into again. But once they went to Mike Solari and once they went to Andy Dickerson, and last year even to an extent with Scott Huff, who recruited Lamea, he's talked about that. He knew the guy inside and out. Christian Haynes, I don't know, he was more fits like the profile of what they had at Washington physically, but Haynes actually fits his own scheme probably better. He was very excited when they drafted. I mean, when they hired Kubiak, I saw him put out a tweet. So I don't think he was very happy with Ryan Grubb's take on his strength. So I think one of the issues I've had with the organization, with even Mike McDonald's staff last year, was just the lack of alignment from the front office to the coaching staff. It seemed like the offseason was a total miss from the free agency standpoint, where like they didn't bring anyone who had been in Baltimore. They didn't bring anyone who fit in those schemes. All the players were a mismatch of guys. The linebacker thing was awful before they made the trade in season. I'm hoping, in an ideal sense, I like the idea of a big, powerful offensive line. I love that McVay kind of shifted towards that. They've had good success there. But for me right now, it's really important they just have alignment in the building. I think they've really lost that. Even when they tried to switch to Vic Fangio's defense with Clint Hurd, Sean Desai, and they had to retool their whole defensive line like twice, which is a disaster from a team building standpoint. And really, they were first they brought in these guys who didn't fit the defense, and they tried to fit the defense, and they brought in Draymond Jones, and he didn't fit the new defense, and it's like, what are you guys doing here? So it's nice that they have a full alignment down. They have Kubiak's guys. I think they're going to bring more of his guys in. Ideally, yeah, I don't love the zone blocking idea. Like, you've seen some of the limitations with, I know Matt Hasselbeck was on radio saying zone schemes are typically softer, and you've seen the Baltimore-Pittsburgh. Baltimore did have Gary Kubiak as OC when they should have went to the Super Bowl the year that Seattle lost to New England. Baltimore was a better team than New England was. That thing worked. The play action, the run game, when it connects like that with the defense, and McDonald was around Kubiak. If you remember that 2014 Baltimore team, it was a really fun team. And 2015 in Denver, when they won the Super Bowl with Gary, it was really good defense, same offense, zone blocking. So we've seen it works when you tie it with a good defense.
Niners.
Yeah. When you've seen this thing work. So I think most of all, the importance is that it's been a huge area of criticism for me from the organization. There's been the front office to the coaching staff's had a lack of alignment. I'm hoping that bringing in like a full staff, and even last year it seemed clunky with Grubb and Huff, and you talked about this kind of the all-star coaching staff. This Pete's has been in the Sean McVay offense. It seems like he's sticking around. I'm hoping just with Janoko and with some of these guys, it's a consistent message of who the kind of guys that want, who they work. Now, I don't know if the front office has gone rogue. Like, I've heard stories where Tom Cable has influenced John, who he's wanted, and it's gone against what the front office wanted. I've heard a lot of complaints from people that used to be in their front office. I've put out a tweet about Tom Cable before, and I had someone DM me saying, you're dead on. Like, and he gave me a couple of examples. Brian Schottenheimer didn't want to draft Nick Chubb. He was around him at Georgia. There was no alignment in there. And I know the front office was very bitter. They didn't take Nick Chubb. They ended up taking Penny. Yeah, head shake. Oh, that's dead on. So this has been a problem for them for years. I'm hoping this staff mixing in with Schneider's guys with time, they can get this right.
So I had a little look at who were the good zone blocking linemen in the draft, and I just wanted to run these names out. So if people are interested, and we'll see how many that end up in Seattle, if any of them. So there are 3 linemen that I can see who are in this draft who graded in the 90s, which is what Fuaga graded in zone blocking, and that is Jennings Dunker, who is a pretty solid offensive lineman from Iowa. And Jeff, I don't know about you, I'm always happy to draft an offensive lineman from Iowa, so that's fine.
Iowa lineman.
Wyatt Millam, who I thought had a pretty poor Senior Bowl, was quite disappointing there. But his tape, there is some aggressive play, and he has graded very well in zone blocking. And then there's Charles Grant, who was the tackle from William and Mary. He was injured and didn't make the Senior Bowl. I think he's a pure tackle, so I'm not sure that that's somebody they're going to be rushing to draft because he's a left tackle. But they graded in the 90s. And then there's a whole bunch of guys in the 80s. Gray Zabel, who's obviously very well known. Willie Lampkin, who's the 5'11" center. Now, I interviewed Ty Robinson the other day, and he was like raving about Willie Lampkin at the Senior Bowl, which I was a bit surprising. But it's hard to imagine that the NFL is going to have a 5'11" center. I mean, and he had some rough moments at the Senior Bowl as well. Armand Membu's obviously getting a lot of first round love. It's graded well in zone blocking. Jack Nelson, I really like left tackle at Wisconsin who could kick inside. Again, give me a Wisconsin lineman like Jack Nelson. I'm happy with that. Logan Brown, big tackle from Kansas. I think has to stay at tackle. Clay Webb did okay. Small school at the Senior Bowl. Cam Williams. Oh, that worried me, Jeff. He graded well in zone blocking.
God, no.
But maybe it's a scheme thing because Kelvin Banks also graded very well in zone blocking, and he's much more. Yeah, he's much more preferable in round 1 than Cam Williams in even round 4 would scare me. Marcus Bowe from Purdue, I thought had a pretty poor Senior Bowl, but is athletic. And then Connor Colby, the other Iowa guard. Again, I someone like Connor Colby, Jennings Dunker, Jeff, it wouldn't surprise me if Seattle think, round 3, we'll take those guys because they are good, solid offensive linemen with good zone blocking grades. So those are the players, and I do wonder if they will go in that direction. And I also wonder if they'll go in that direction with free agency, Jeff. And that feels as if it's the thing that most people are talking about that's not a Geno Smith conversation or a DK Metcalf conversation right now is free agent linemen. What do they do? And I have to say, Jeff, I've probably changed my mind about 17 times on what I think they might do or could do with these veterans. And I'm just not sure. I do think there's a chance of a splash just because they did it last year with Leonard Williams and the year before with Draymond Jones. I think they're determined to do best player available in that first round because they've done it for a few years now. And the only way they're ever going to be able to take best player available, Jeff, in the first round is if they address the offensive line in free agency. So I think they are going to do something. I just don't know who that player is. My money, if you said you've got to put $15 on who's it going to be, I think purely because of the scheme and the importance of the center position. I know it flies in the face of what Seattle has done. I think Drew Dahlman is where I would put the money, but I'm not crazy about confidence levels in that. What are you thinking about free agency right now?
I've been a little alarmed by Mike Macdonald's quick, and maybe this is coach speak, but in his interview with Aaron Levine, and again today, he made a clear emphasis to talk about how he's really committed. He really likes the players they have, and I don't know if he's just saying that. I don't know if maybe coaches just think like that. We can develop these guys. They just drafted a bunch of them last year. They have Haynes. They have LeMaya. The question I would be asking if I was at these press conferences is, you saw Kyle Shanahan sign Alex Mack in San Francisco and Atlanta when they installed this offense. You saw the splits when they had Eric McCoy last year. If I'm asking Clint Kubiak a question or Mike a question today, Derek Carr talked about how the offensive line, the center, made a lot of the line calls to maximize. Are you looking to have a veteran center like those guys did to maximize this offense, or are you looking to develop that? Because Olu's fine if you have the other guards around him, but Olu's got some limitations. I get he'd be fine in his own scheme, but he's still a limited physical player. He doesn't move that well. He can get blown off the ball pretty easily. He doesn't fit the profile of like Alex Mack. Drew Dahlman is the very natural. I would have been sniffing around questions to try to get an answer if they're going to sign someone like Drew Dahlman. But Mike keeps talking about it. They like the guys they have, and I'm like, oh shit. They're going to do this again, and they're going to just wait for the draft. If I have one of the youngest offensive lines in the league, my solution to that is not just bringing a rookie. I think they should draft offensive line. I think they should draft offensive line almost every year, like the Eagles do. But my solution to one of the youngest lines that has limitations at 3 spots, when I'm pleading with all 3 of these guys, McDonald, Kubiak, they need a veteran in there and not a Laken Tomlinson caliber veteran. Drew Dahlman is the cleanest scheme fit. He makes sense from his own standpoint. His grades are good. He knows the offense. I would be happy to pay him pretty good money. Just by redoing Geno alone, you can create probably $23 million in cap room. I saw some people say $5 million, $23 million in cap room. They could probably create by just redoing Geno's deal, even if they give him more money. That the first year of a new deal will reduce the first year salary cap hit by probably up to $23 million. So they can spend that money on a center, a guard. I would hope so, but I think for the last 7 years, I've convinced myself this is going to be the year Schneider's going to be different. And then I end up being wrong. So if I had to bet, it probably would be Dahlman. Like, there's a bunch of guards that I would be looking at as well. Like, they have a big hole at left guard. Laken Tomlinson is not being brought back. I don't know if they're kicking Haynes out there, but it's a giant hole in the roster. There's some solid mid-level offensive linemen. I love Mekhi Becton, the idea of that. In this scheme, I'm guessing that's probably a long shot. They had a gap scheme guy. He'd probably be a better bet. I think there's a lot of like mid-level. I think they have to get an interior lineman in free agency. But I wish somebody pushed back more on these questions because Mike's been kind of like, oh, our guys are really good. We just need the right coach to get the most out of them.
That needs to be questioned, and it doesn't. There's nothing wrong with questioning it, is it, Jeff? Do you know what was interesting though? Do you know what Christian Haynes' zone blocking grade was?
I didn't look at that. His body type is weird.
Right, so I've got it here. His so we mentioned how Talies Fuaga was. Let me just remind myself what it was. 91.3. So it's really good. It's an elite zone blocking grade. Christian Haynes, 89.2. So it's right there, Jeff. So they, he's
going to be starting next year.
He's somebody who you said it. He's happy with this. Based purely on his grade at Connecticut, he's a perfect fit for this scheme.
I saw him tweet about Clint Kubiak. I don't think that was a random thing. I didn't even look it up, but I'm guessing he's going to be starting at guard next year. I'm guessing the scheme can kind of reduce his limitations. I don't think they're going to be replacing three guys. Like I would love them to sign a new left guard, even a center, and then go into the draft and keep adding to the. But if they end up just signing a center and then drafting a left guard, I think that's got the makings of a decent line. And I think Tyler Booker can play in his own blocking scheme. I don't know what his grades were, but I think his profile would work. I think he'd be best in.
Completely agree.
I think he would be best in a power line, but I think Tyler Booker's in there in the first round, and I think he's still turning the card there. They lost the division essentially last year because they couldn't convert third and one and fourth and one multiple times. And I don't think just putting in better zone blockers is going to fix it. They need someone who can push someone off the line. So I think Booker is still the ideal draft pick. And I think if you combine like a better center or even a Ryan Kelly as a stopgap with a Booker, I think it opens up a lot of opportunities. I think Olu's a backup. I think there's nothing wrong with him. I think he's a totally fine backup. If you have to play him in a pinch, like when he came off the bench last year, he played his best game of the year. But like with most backups, when they get a full sample, you see they're limited. It happens all the time with Gardner Minshew. Yep. Look at Eric McCoy, man. James Daniels is a free agent. Coming off ACL.
So this is so I'm going to zone in on. This is all in order of zone blocking. So I hope people can see this on the screen. You can pretty much see it. And so this is the zone blocking grade. And again, it's PFF. So you can see there, Jeff, there's some frustrating things as well, because there are players as we go down this list that you'll think, well, the Seahawks could have had them, it could have had them. Yeah. There's a player we talked about. There's a player we talked about. So there's plenty of that. But James Daniels is a free agent. He is 93.2 now. He has been injured a lot, but it does make you think, is that the kind of player who fits the kind of thing John would do? Is it a reasonable age? He's not going to be as expensive as some of the others. That does feel like a Seahawks kind of signing.
It does.
It is frustrating. This is when I'm talking about the frustration. Zach Tom, who was fourth round, and we talked about a lot on the blog, is there at 5. Creed Humphrey, who everybody talks about, is there at 7. You mentioned Will Freeze, I think it is.
Yeah,
it should be Fries. I mean, especially if you're on a lineman. So he's got a 91.2 zone blocking grade. So he is going to be available, but he's another one, Jeff, isn't he? Who's had
coming off an
injuries. And then as we look further down, I'm trying to see if there's any. So Kevin Zeitler is a free agent. I need to stop. There we go. So Kevin Zeitler is a free agent, but I don't know whether he's going to be.
I think that's Drew Dahlman. There he is.
Yep, there is Drew Dahlman.
Right under Trey Smith. Yeah.
There. So Trey Smith's there, and this is the thing. So Trey Smith might cost you $25 million a year. Drew Dahlman's zone blocking grade is almost identical, and he could be half the price. So you do sort of wonder, will they focus their attentions on a Dahlman rather than a Smith? I suppose it's also possible that both players get signed up before they reach free agency. And then, I just wonder, Joe Tooney's there at 44, Jeff. The Chiefs can't pay everybody.
No.
And he's older, and they may just decide, rather than pay you a lot of money, we'll pay Trey Smith a lot of money. And then does that produce an opportunity to trade for Joe Tooney? I don't know. And maybe if you sort of give him the kind of financial package that makes it worth his while to sort of finish his career 2 or 3 years in Seattle, would you be interested in that? It would have to be, I think, for a 4th round pick at most.
I was going to say, yeah, I would do that. I think there's a huge need to get a veteran player in this group. There's such a young line. I don't think just putting in a rookie is going to solve these problems. I think they need a leader in the group as well. I think Charles Cross is a very nice, soft-spoken guy. I think Abe Lucas is a lead-by-example guy, but like if you've heard Tom Cable talking about Max Unger and how he was the leader of that group, and we've seen so many centers over the years, I think they need a guard or a center in that line that's going to really elevate what they do.
The thing is looking through this list, Jeff, there's not a ton of options there. That's the problem. There is not. There are sort of 10 players, like even that you could go, right, okay, they're obvious zone blocking system, quality offensive lineman. But that's why I think it's going to take a splash. That's why I think, Jeff, by all means, send me a DM, come on one of these streams 3 days into free agency and go, you jinxed it. You ruined it, Rob. You've blown everything. I've just got a feeling that in the first 2 days of free agency, we're going to see the Seahawks have made a considerable investment in their offensive line. They have to, because if they don't, they are going to be forced to go into the draft. I agree with you on Trey Booker, by the way. I just think he fits any scheme. And he's just so admired for his leadership and everything that I think you could, and I do think you could completely justify his talent at 18. But if he's off the board, and then if players like Membu are off the board as well, who obviously have fit the zone blocking thing, you can't force this, Jeff. You have to just accept that you're gonna have to play the board, and that could be a defender, it could be a tight end, it could be anything. You can't force that pick though. So I think they are going to, at the very least, sign one big ticket free agent, and then maybe a hedge. And I think someone like Lucas Patrick, I've been saying him, Jeff, he played decently well for the Saints last year. And that just feels like an obvious, see if you can bring him in for a year.
Yeah, like I'm hoping like they don't just sign like Aaron Banks, who was in Kyle Shanahan's offense, who was very mediocre. And we got our left guard option. It's a better than Tomlinson. Let's go into the draft. Let's get a guard. And then we're going with, if that's the case, I'm going to be pretty down on the offseason. That's my fear.
I liked Aaron Banks at Notre Dame, but if you can't excel playing next to Trent Williams, then it makes you wonder a little bit. I think that maybe I was mistaken on that one. But the options are there, Jeff. What I would say is I don't think the options are there to have the kind of the 2021 that the Chiefs had.
Yeah,
I think what all fans are hoping for. I'd love that commitment to it, but I'm just not sure. But they can do some things. Hopefully, coaching will help. Hopefully, someone like Christian Haynes actually proves to be worth the 3rd rounder that they spent on him, and they can figure this out. But that's kind of where we are with the offensive line. We've still got a few other things to discuss, but I want to get the super chats out of the way first. Noah says, of the day 2 quarterbacks, who are your personal favorites? I don't know if you've had a chance to study them, Jeff. I'm going to avoid. I mean, I've got a horizontal board on the blog. You can go and see kind of how I've graded the quarterbacks. I'm not going to attach myself to any names, because all that happens then is people sort of, you end up becoming the Will Howard guy or the Quinn Ewers guy. So I'm not going to say I have a favorite, go and draft this guy. I've graded them as I've graded them, but I do think they'll take them. We'll talk a bit more about this in a bit. But Jeff, have you got a favorite, or are you still in the early stages of this?
I'm still in the early stages, but watching the college football playoffs, I couldn't help but think Schneider's going to love Will Howard. He looked, if I said this during the college regular season, it wouldn't have been as exciting, but watching his growth and him, I remember him talking about Russell Wilson during like the bowl games, and watching Will Howard and how he commanded that team. And I know they had basically an all-star team around them. I think he would work in this offense. And once I heard Kubiak, I'm like, okay, this opens up some different, because Look, the Kubiak Shanahan tree, the Shanahan guys especially, love Kirk Cousins. Like, he is like the dream quarterback in that offense. So I'm trying to think. John's ideal quarterback's a lot different. He's the big arm, Brett Favre, sling it down the field. This tree loves the guys who are on time. They're efficient. Like someone like Russ, for example, doesn't work in this offense. He's not on time. We saw him the 1 year with Waldron. It was clunky. They're not looking for these big play monsters. Like they tried the Trey Lance thing. You saw well that one. Brock Purdy. Think of the quarterbacks that worked in this offense. Brock Purdy, Kirk Cousins, Jimmy Garoppolo to an extent. He was limited to the end, but Jimmy did take them to a Super Bowl on the back of a really talented team. But back in the day, Matt Schaub was really good in this offense with Gary and Kyle and Houston. I think Will Howard has a lot of this similar, like somewhat movement skills, decent arm. I don't think he's got a huge arm. I think he profiles some people like Kyle McCord. I need to dig into them more. He makes me a little nervous under pressure. I don't love that idea. Yeah, your face. I've heard people say it.
I'm not crazy. I just think, they ran him out of town,
That's why I think Howard can have like a Purdy-like style in this offense. He can move a little bit. He's not as quick as Purdy, I don't think, but I think Howard, of anyone of all this crop, I think he's the guy that I've circled so far.
The thing about Howard is he's not twitchy. Like Purdy's surprisingly twitchy.
Yeah, he's got crazy.
He's got like acceleration and quick, isn't he? Was what Howard can do is if you need a yard, and he can run somebody over and get a yard. Like he can plow his way through because he's 245 pounds.
Well, you heard talking about Taysom Hill today.
Well, exactly. No, that is an interesting thing. What I would say, Jeff, is this is if you ever get a chance, and to anybody who is listening to this. If you want to sort of get a real feel for Will Howard, go and watch all the playoff games and watch third downs. And I said this with Puck, I think last week. I spoke to a former GM a while ago, and they said that all they do is focus on third downs. They don't watch anything other than every third down, the quarterback throws. And then once they've watched all of those, they decide whether they want to watch anymore. And I suspect it's not as definitive as that, as I'm not watching anymore now because he's no good on third down. I suspect there's probably a bit more work goes in than that. But it was interesting how much value they placed on third down. And when you watch the playoffs, they converted 50% of their third downs when it mattered. It was exactly 50%, I think. Ohio State, I did the maths. And there were so many critical third and fourth downs. And Will Howard's, he ran for a few of them, Jeff.
Yeah.
A few of them were not difficult completions because they were well schemed by Chip Kelly. There were some fantastic third downs, game-winning third downs, including in the final game in the national championship.
Oh, that coverage was like the worst thing I've ever seen.
It was awful, but he got it there. He saw it and he threw it and it completed. But there were plays throughout the playoffs where he's getting hit in the face. He stands in the pocket. He lets the route develop, and then he throws it with timing and accuracy, and he makes a big conversion. And I didn't see any of that during the regular season. And then when the playoffs started, he had a Joe Flacco winning the Super Bowl playoff run when it got to the playoffs. And that matters. Like it matters that when the big games were there, he didn't just prop up a quality team. He played a huge role in those playoffs. And that, to me, matters. I don't think Will Howard is, in a few years, Jeff, is going to come into the league, and if he ends up in the right place, he's going to be the next Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow or anything like that. But what he can be is a player who does not prevent you from thinking you might have a chance. I think he's somebody who, at the very least, like Andy Dalton never won a big playoff game for the Bengals, but you never went into the postseason thinking, the Bengals won't win. Like, because of Dalton, you always kind of thought they've got a good team, they've got a chance, and they could just never get it done. And I think that's what the Seahawks could be. They could be like, it is like Flacco with the Ravens. You never really looked at Flacco and thought he's going to win a title one day, which is kind of what you think with Burrow. But Joe Flacco did win a Super Bowl, and you just think, I can imagine Howard succeeding, and those third down conversions in those playoff games made me believe there is something there. And I do believe there's something there. And we'll talk a bit more about the quarterbacks in a bit. But I think he is a guy that John will like. The only thing I think is with Howard is the Jets need a quarterback. And Will Howard, to me, feels like an Aaron Glenn type of guy. And I just wonder if teams are going to think, because there's no first-round quarterbacks apart from 2, we're going to start taking quarterbacks in round 2 because we don't want to miss out. And I can imagine the Jets just taking him in the 40s or whatever they pick and saying, what if 42 or something? Like, we'll take him at 42 because we want him. Because the Lions didn't give a toss about people's reactions to their picks. And I don't think Aaron Glenn and the Jets will do either. They'll take who they want. So I think there's a chance he goes there. But then I think there are other players. I think the Seahawks, I think there's 2 or 3 quarterbacks the Seahawks will be quite comfortable getting. And that's why I think they're going to take one at some point. But like I said, we will come back to this soon. Martin says, do we go O-line or defense with our pick 18? Also, do we need to take 2 tight ends from this class as replacements for Pharaoh Brown and for Noah Fant? Jeff, in my opinion, I think they'll keep Fant, rightly or wrongly, at least until after the draft. Brown's a goner. So they do need to draft, I think, at least 1 tight end, and I think they will. And I think there's tight ends they can draft a bit later on who are really good in this class. O-line, so your thoughts on that, and also your thoughts on O-line or defense. I think it could be either, and I think it could be other positions as well. I think it's very fluid at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think I think if I were them, I'd probably move off Noah Fant. I get the sense that they still think there's more there. And I'm guessing they're going to blame the scheme or something like that. Give him 1 more year. I never really understood the contract they signed there. I thought it was pretty clear on who he was the last couple of years in the Waldron offense.
You can't replace everyone, can you?
That's the thing. They do need the cap space, and they could get like a Juwan Johnson maybe for a lesser price. But like, I would not be spending on free agent tight ends. I think AJ Barner proved to be pretty solid. This is a really good tight end draft. If I were them, I'd move off Fant, probably draft a guy and then sign or draft the 3rd guy. But if you want to run this offense, they're going to be a lot in 12 personnel. They got to be bigger. They got to be stronger. They got to be a mix. So I would personally move off Fant. My guess is they don't. I think that would probably be a mistake. In terms of the first-round pick, I think you're good either way. I think you got to go with what's there. Look, if Tyler Booker's there, I think that should be the pick. But look, I think with the Seahawks, if you're evaluating what happened in the Super Bowl and where the Seahawks are, where they need to go, I think what a lot of teams do, and I've been advocating against this for a long time, I think teams always try to fill weaknesses instead of build on strengths. And I think what makes teams great, and the Eagles are the best example of this, if you look at like who they've drafted and the years, and they had Fletcher Cox and they drafted other guys, and I'm not going to give them credit for drafting Jalen Carter. I'm sorry. Anyone could have made that pick in their spot. He was the number 1 probably rated player. He had all the character issues.
He was one of the best players to come into the draft in a long time.
Yeah, like, I'm not giving him credit for that. But
he had, just to say, because there's a lot of Seahawks fans. I mean, I'm still getting it now, messages about him. Jalen Carter had the single most complex character evaluation assessment, and there were plenty of teams, not just the Seahawks, who wouldn't have gone anywhere near him. And there's no point second guessing it. Like, the Eagles were the perfect team for him. They had a whole bunch of his teammates. They had veterans like Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelsey on that team when he was drafted. It was the perfect storm for the Eagles to take him. They had a high pick, and even they were thinking second guessing it, and they took him. So it's not a bold, brave decision. It was one that they could justify, and other teams like the Seahawks couldn't, and no one should second guess.
Yeah, if you're a fan of the Raiders, for example, who took Tyree Wilson, who's like their 5th string D end, like, I think in hindsight you could complain a little bit, but like, the Seahawks got Devin Witherspoon. It's like the face of their team. Like, they did pretty well. So I'm not going to sit here. Obviously, I'd rather have the best interior defensive line, all things being equal. But they ended up getting Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy. It worked out pretty well.
And it's not just the Carr thing either. Like, there was more stuff to the Carter stuff. I mean, it was you and I have talked about this privately.
Yeah, and like, he was only playing 40% of snaps or something. Now he's playing 80%. Like, things have worked out really well.
There was a lot.
There's a lot there. So,
there was a lot with Jalen Carter. There was a lot there.
So anyway, like, going back to what I'm saying, I think if you're the Seahawks, who had a pretty good defense last year, showed flashes of being really good, but weren't consistently really good. You saw it in that Green Bay game. You saw it in Minnesota where they couldn't hang on to the lead. They're a good team. They have been building a nice defensive line, but they're not great at anything yet. And so I think building a strength like the Eagles have done with their defensive line, where they keep hammering defensive linemen, I think the Seahawks could get an edge rusher. I think the Seahawks can get another defensive tackle. I would be very okay with trying to build a really good defensive line, just keep firing bodies. I don't know who that's going to be. I think we need to study this draft. I think some people like Shamar Stewart. I don't know if he'll even be there. I feel like he'll have like a Trevon Walker, like rise in a weak draft. I think people will convince themselves into him after the combine. Someone is going to do it. I don't know. I think you got to see who's there, but ideally a defensive lineman or a guard or a tackle that's converted to guard, any of those I can live with. But I don't know. It's looking at this before the combine is a really tricky thing. The combine influences so much value and grades, and it probably shouldn't, but it does, based on that you've done more on the testing than anyone else. So the testing is going to have a big impact on these guys, and they're picking 18, so you can't really say now what they should do. It's based on who falls to them. Like even the week of the draft, even the day of the draft, I would have bet every dollar I had there's no way Byron Murphy would fall to 16, and he had a decent first year. Like he showed a lot on tape, but at that time it seemed like a no-brainer. So I still think he has a lot to go. I think Murphy and Williams is the makings of a really good D-line group, but their edge rushers are full of second-rounders that are just okay. They're good rushers. They're more of the Josh Sweat types, but you see what happens when you have just a handful of guys and you keep firing dudes at that line. If you want to make the Seahawks go from good to great, I think you keep building up front and keep adding bodies to that group.
I think 18. You are right on the the line of getting a player that you'd feel comfortable taking within round one.
Yeah,
I think if you picked at 16 again this year, Jeff, I'd say that you are pretty much guaranteed to get a player that you'd be quite happy with. I think 18. It's whenever I do a mock draft, there's always somebody who you would call a quote unquote big name who gets to 18. So I think there's still a chance that you could get there. I had a look at Lance Zierlein's ratings, and he had, so this is just to give you an example of that. The 18th best player in his ratings is Jalen Walker at Georgia, who I would be comfortable with. And then Shamar Stewart's 19, Matthew Golden 20, Terry McMillan 21. But then he has Cam Ward 22, so Cam Ward presumably is going to go before that, which then pushes other players. So your Kelvin Banks, as you will, Campbell's, people like that are going to then fall down a little bit more. So I think there's going to be a chance that there will be a reasonably good player there at 18, whatever happens. But again, have a good free agency so that you don't have to force anything at 18. Be Calm C clearly says, I expect a better line draft and 12 wins, period. That's a bold expectation. I'd take 12 wins, but we will see what happens in the offseason first. Glenn says, you guys are great. Thank you, Glenn. Much appreciated. And he has added another saying, just fix the O-line. And Jeff and I are definitely aligned on that one. Two more. Swine Flu says, I'd almost rather kick Abe Lucas inside and draft or sign a true right tackle and sign a center. Ronnie Stanley or Cam Robinson zone blockers. They're not, and I don't want to kick Abe Lucas. If there was an obvious reason to do it, then I'd go for it. But Jeff, I don't see an amazing right tackle in round one, for example, or like an amazing right tackle that I have to have on day two either. That would make me want to do that. I think the best players in this draft for the offensive line are either guards or tackle converts. So I don't know why you'd kick Abe Lucas inside.
Yeah, I think Abe Lucas profiles very well at right tackle, especially in this system. He surprisingly was better in zone than he was in gap last year. He was one of the only linemen. And he was coming off a year where there was no offseason really for him. He was rehabbing for basically a year and a half. You really liked him coming out of the draft. I think physically, once he can get his game shape back, I think he projects really well at right tackle. I would not make that move.
One final one for now, because we've got there's about three big topics I want to get into before we finish. Meister Windu says, I wonder how Schneider feels after the Super Bowl. Philly dominated in those areas in which Schneider has failed during the last decade. Everyone praises Howie Roseman. Howie Roseman's going to go to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
That's not a doubt. He is the best executive in the league, in my opinion. And I think probably everybody hardly going out on a limb to say that. What I would say, though, and I do think this is important context, because there are a few things that people need to know about the time that Howie Roseman has been in charge. So Howie Roseman initially was the GM for the Eagles prior to Chip Kelly sort of stealing control of him. And in the 4 years from 2010 to 2014, the Eagles' record was 42-38, which is very Seahawky over the last few years.
It was.
And then after they won the Super Bowl, they then went 31-33 over the next 4 seasons, which is even worse. So, it's Howie Roseman just hasn't had an amazing, unbelievable, flawless front yet. There's been a lot of average within Howie Roseman's tenure, punctuated by 2 Super Bowls, which is pretty remarkable that you can go average, amazing. And like last year's a great example of that. They completely collapsed at the end of last season, looked awful, looked like everyone was going to get fired. And a year later, Nick Sirianni's gone from a laughing stock to a Super Bowl winning head coach. He now has as many Super Bowls as Pete Carroll. So, and there's some other glaring errors. I mean, Howie Roseman took Jalen Reagor with the 20th overall pick, and the 21st overall pick was Justin Jefferson. There was a $51 million free agent signing. There was a healthy scratch against the Chiefs in Bryce Huff. So it's not that he gets everything right. It's just that he has done an excellent job in the trenches. He has been able to find a quarterback who can do enough to make the most of the weapons they've got. And the thing that he does, Jeff, and I think this is the thing I wrote about more than anything yesterday, is there is no better GM in the league at seeing opportunities in the veteran market. And the Seahawks consistently do a crap job in free agency. They've done some decent trades every now and again, but they need to sort of when someone like Saquon Barkley's there, they need to go and be ready. When there's a Trent Williams trade to be made, they need to be ready. When there's a Christian McCaffrey trade to be made, they need to be ready, which is going to lead me on segueing perfectly to Miles Garrett in a second. But it's the veteran market, Jeff, where the Seahawks need to be better. They're signing too many bang average or bad free agents, and that's not helping them.
No, you're right. Everyone seems to forget Howie Roseman was kind of enemy number 1 a couple of years ago in Philadelphia. And 2019, DK Metcalf was like the biggest reason, who's now become a very polarizing player in Seattle. But in 2019, DK Metcalf was there for them twice. They took Andre Dillard, who turned out to be a bust, and they took the receiver from Stanford. Remember his name?
Yeah, he was in Seattle for a bit, wasn't he?
He was in Seattle for a cup of coffee. I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Had like a double barrel name, I think.
Yeah.
I'll have a look.
That year in the playoffs, the last time the Seahawks won a playoff game, DK Metcalf had this game where he made the game-winning catch. He had a big touchdown. He was the best player in the field. And it drove Eagles fans berserk. That was the low moment for the Eagles. And then in 2020, they come in. That was the COVID draft where you got to see all his reactions. Mike Zimmer was seen on camera giggling when the Eagles took Jalen Reagor. He was giggling on camera. They were all at home. They were all, remember Bill Belichick with his dog and all that stuff. There's a clip of Zimmer giggling at them. Mike Zimmer. And Justin Jefferson goes the next pick. So the DK thing.
It's probably the only time that Mike Zimmer has giggled as well.
I know. It was crazy. And then since then, the 2021 draft, Roseman's been on a heater. And it's kind of like Schneider, where Schneider was cold a lot longer, but he kind of recovered. He's had 3 good drafts in a row. Not great drafts, but Roseman's had 4 heater. And what you love about Roseman is he's got a philosophy. He sticks to it. And it's not just the draft. And I tweeted this the other day watching the Super Bowl. Everyone forgets Drew Lock beat this team last year. Me and you were banging our heads against the wall because we were scared that Drew Lock was going to get these guys to keep their jobs. And remember that team? They lost 32-9 to Tampa Bay in the playoffs. And they got blown the doors off of them. I put out the last 6 games in a tweet the other day. So the reason me and you do these pods, me and you you're into the draft, I get into the offseason. One great offseason can change the fortunes. It's not like other sports where it takes years. I know in other sports, the draft, sometimes you don't see the fruits of the draft for 4 years. The Eagles were not too that far from where the Seahawks were. They had a much better offensive line, I'll say that. But they lost Jason Kelce. They completely collapsed. They had to replace both coordinators. And they hit on everything. They had an all-time offseason, similar to the Seahawks in 2012. They've done it before, 2010, things like that. But I don't think the Seahawks are that far. But, yeah, Roseman has used finding Zach Bond, who's a guy I actually found some old tweets of me saying, I really like Zach Bond in the 2020 draft. Mekhi Becton was in that draft. He's the kind of guy Schneider historically has liked. And the big name, kind of busty, They did really, really well. They hit on everything. Saquon was an amazing opportunity. And then they hired both coordinators. They crushed the draft. They fixed their whole secondary. Somehow Cooper DeJean falls to the second round. And there's a lot of buzz that the Seahawks might have taken Cooper DeJean had Murphy not been there and they moved out. And we would have all hated it, laughed at it. But the guy's a good player. I don't think it's what they needed, but
they do a very good job of doing what the Seahawks are trying to do, which is let the draft come to them.
Yeah.
Because people will say, oh, they just drafted. I think Brock Hewitt say this, and it's not correct that they just draft the trenches early all the time. And they don't, because they've
a lot of receivers.
Yeah, receivers, cornerback last year. You know, a lot of their high picks are typically best player available picks, which is what the Seahawks are doing. It's just that they had veteran offensive defensive linemen who, you know, Harry Roseman inherited some of those guys. And then they've built around them. They've planned ahead. They've like extremely planned ahead, as if like it's almost like Green Bay planning for life with Brett Favre. They're like, we'll draft we'll draft two centers, and then we'll just put Landon Dickerson at guard instead, and have Cameo. Like it's so prepared and planned, but that's clever. But you can only really do that if you've got the foundation on the O line to begin with. And when you are sort of inheriting a lot of good players, I think he inherited Lane Johnson as well. It's a lot easier to sort of plan ahead and sort of do those kind of things than if you don't. And Fletcher Cox is, you know, and people like that, you know, and they're on your line already. Then you can build from that. And he's had that opportunity, and Schneider has not. But this is going to sound ridiculous to a lot of people, Jeff. I don't think the Seahawks are a million miles away. I don't think they are. I think that was why I enjoyed the Super Bowl as much as I did, because it made me think, do you know what? If you can build a great defense and you can put together an offense that just functions and can be explosive and can run the ball, you can give someone a game. Doesn't mean you're going to win a Super Bowl, but it means that they can be competitive. And I think the Seahawks have got a pathway to being more competitive and to being a playoff team, but they do have to aggressively fix their trenches. And I think when there are opportunities to acquire elite players, they've got to do it. Because I think you made a point this week saying 10, I think you said sort of 10 to 40 or something, Seahawks roster, pretty good. It's that sort of elite 10 they don't have. They don't have 5 blue chip players who are better to get in any team. And when you're sort of looking to acquire players, what you've got to do is not think, a box safety for 2 firsts and a third, who's is a good idea. That's not a good idea. When Miles Garrett suddenly emerges as asking for a trade, you've got to be in the mix. Now, by all accounts, Curtis was telling me like it's almost impossible for the Browns to trade him because of financial.
It doesn't.
But he will push the envelope because he wants out. You have got Schefter says he thinks it'll be a slow burn because it'll be hard, and that you will have to just be very aggressive with Cleveland and force their hand. I suspect, Jeff, that this is going to be very, very, very difficult to do. But what I don't understand are the people I've been talked about it that push back and go, you can't trade for Miles Garrett. There's too much else to do. It's like, no, this is exactly the kind of move you have to make. The way you get better is by adding elite players, not carrying on doing what you've been doing for the last few years, adding decent players, but never getting elite. If one of the best 10 players in the NFL becomes available, Jeff, you have to go for that. And Miles Garrett is one of the 10 best players at a premier position. If you put Miles Garrett on that Seahawks team last year, you are winning 12 games, if not more. You are. He's that much of a difference maker. If they get a chance to do this, Jeff, I think they've got to do it.
I'm with you. A lot of people are circling back to the trades they made in the past. I get why. I get they gave up first-round picks sometimes to – does anyone complain about the Dwayne Brown trade? If they had taken those 2 first-round picks that they spent on Jamal and traded for Max Crosby at the time, I don't think we would have even cared. I don't think we would have made a difference. The issue isn't that they traded for veteran players and didn't sign them. The issue is that they traded for a box safety, a soft finesse tight end, and a gadget wide receiver. The idea is there. They're rare players. They can't get them in the draft. I get it. But I said it at the time. I remember saying to Jamal, if they went around the league and called every team and said, I will give you 2 first-round picks for your best player, they would have got way better options than Jamal. And if they got like TJ Watt or Quentin Nelson or Joe Thuney, like no one would have cared. And I think this is the fact that they traded for they're all in a sense gadget players. Jamal, Jimmy, and Percy were all gadget players. If they were the Howie Roseman line of scrimmage, Miles Garrett's that dude, man. I think it's very clear watching the Seahawks. They have good edge rushers. They don't have great edge rushers. I think Boye kind of is what he is. He's a solid player. Derek Hall took a nice step, but I don't know if Derek Hall is going to become Will Anderson. I think he was always kind of a light version. I think he's a good player. I think he's a lot like Josh Sweat, who we saw have a really good game. Derek Hall kind of became like that, but I think the Eagles are going to – I don't know if they're even going to re-sign him. I think he's a guy you let go. They could use a great player. Imagine you put Miles Garrett in this defense with the guys they have, and how do you saw what happened with the Ravens. You took Clowney out of that defense this year. They weren't nearly as fierce on the edge. And they didn't have that 3-level dominant feel when they had McDonald and they had those guys. McDonald has a very good scheme. They have a lot of good young players, but they don't have many great players other than Devin Witherspoon. Leonard Williams had a great year. I thought he had a better year potentially than the Defensive Player of the Year, Surtain. I think there's a case Leonard Williams was more dominant. But I knew he wasn't going to win that award. He didn't make the Pro Bowl. So anytime you can get a guy like Miles Garrett, who's one of the 10 best guys in the league, see like what Trent Williams did and what Dwayne Brown did for Seattle. If you can get a guy in the line of scrimmage who's that good, that rare, I'm all for it, especially because this is a weaker draft. Trading away 18 this year and then one other pick, it doesn't hurt you. And the years Schneider has traded, 2013, that was probably the weakest draft in the last 30 years. Everyone talks about the 2013 draft. 2015 was a pretty weak draft. They did the trade for Jimmy Graham because they didn't think. 2021 was the COVID year where they didn't have all the information. That was part of why they did it. And then they ended up getting the other pick back for Russell, luckily, because they had a bad year. But 2021, again, wasn't a great – turned out to be a pretty good draft in the end. I think they prematurely assumed 2021 turned into a pretty legendary top of the draft, except for all those quarterbacks who flopped. But – I think they messed that one up. And again, I don't think the Seahawks will end up doing it. I think there's too many I think you've pointed out how many other teams could just match what they're going to offer. And other teams have more cap situation. And you look at the numbers cap-wise, it brings up a crazy – and they have Deshaun Watson still sitting there. They think they're going to take like a $48 million hit to get rid of their best player. It's a hard sell. So I don't think it's realistic, but I would do it in half a second.
Absolutely. And it's funny actually when you think about the Eagles' defensive line. Carter's their most talented player, but they don't have anybody like Miles Garrett off the edge. They have a bunch of Derek Halls and Boye Maffe's. Josh Sweat's a good player, he's not an elite player. Nolan Smith's a good player, he's not an elite player. They don't have those unbelievable edge rushers, and they have depth up the interior with one. Legitimately star player, but then the Seahawks got Leonard Williams. You kind of hope that Byron Murphy can work out. Jaron Reed's not a bad rotational guy if he comes back. The Seahawks are not a million miles away from having a defensive line that could sort of favorably compare to the Eagles. It might not be as good, but it's not a million miles away either. The big difference between the two, obviously, is the offensive line. You are not going to be able to build an Eagles offensive line in one offseason, but you've got to start. You've got to start, and that's the point. Is you start this offseason. And I believe they will. I think John understands that he's got to do something with this offensive line. I'll be shocked, and I've been shocked in the past, if they just come out and sign the 2025 version of Laken Tomlinson and call it a job. I can't believe they're going to do that. But regardless, we will see what they do. I don't think they're going to trade for Miles Garrett. I don't think anybody is, but at least not until deep down the line. Maybe it's a Khalil Mack before the season type of thing, but I don't know. We will see on that. And I think when it comes to it, they will pick 18th overall or they will trade down. They will probably be best player available with that first pick. It will be football character being significant because that's what it has been and that's the way. There are two other topics, Jeff, I want to get into. Are you okay with that for timing?
Yeah.
First one. So we've said, I think it's clear Geno Smith back because of what they're saying. I think they're going to get a compromise agreement done. All of the talk is that Vegas is going to sign Sam Darnold. Everybody's saying it, Jeff. Yeah. Schefter, I think Glazer said it. That all of the big names are saying they're going after Sam Darnold. And we know that Pete likes Sam Darnold.
We do.
that makes sense. There's a lot of buzz that the top 2 quarterbacks will not make it to 6 either. That maybe Cleveland at 2 or Tennessee will take one of those top 2 tight ends, and that by 3, the top 2 will have gone. So the Raiders have to do something anyway. So Geno looks as if he's not got many other alternatives. It's best for him to come to an agreement. It's best for the Seahawks to come to agreement. I think it's a matter of time till we see something on that, Jeff. I won't be surprised if in the next 10 days we see some kind of agreement between Geno Smith and the Seahawks before the combine. I won't be surprised on that. The other thing, though, they are, again, unequivocal. DK Metcalf, we've got to use him better. I'm looking forward to working with DK. Clint Kubiak, why did you come to Seattle? To work with DK, to work with Geno, to work with Charles Cross, to work with Jackson Smith and Jigba. You know, they're not going to name DK in these things if their idea is to go and trade him. I think they fully intend, Jeff, to get a deal done. And it's probably going to be later in the year, probably in the summer. But I think they will get a deal done with DK. They will lower his cap hit, and he will stay. So for me, Geno and DK are going to end up staying. Do you have any thoughts on what might happen with those 2 players?
Yeah, I think I wrote you on DM the other day when Mike McDonald's interview came out after the Super Bowl, and he was very specific about DK. And I'm like, okay, I was starting to come to the idea that they were going to trade him. And the more I look at this receiver group, and it's a bad receiver group in free agency, and there's a lot of people who's going to miss on T. Higgins, and they're going to be like, okay, what do I do now? It's a weak receiver group in the draft. Like Matthew Golden's, I've seen him as high as like 12th overall, and some Matt Miller mock drafts. And you look at all those receivers last year, like he's not a better prospect than Brian Thomas or any of those guys. He's like a second round. When I first watched him, like this guy's a pretty
good, not great.
Yeah. And so you've seen so many good receiver years and all the hits and all. If you play fantasy football, there's been so much new talent in the league. This year is odd. So initially I had come around to like, I think they're actually makes sense to trade him. Like the value will never be better. But then when you heard them talk today, I went completely 180. And not only did Mike talk very specifically about Geno in that interview on Sunday, today basically they alluded that one of the things they were looking for in the interviews was he was looking for who had the best plan for DK. And he even said that pretty clearly today. So he said one of the things they liked the most about Kubiak and why he got the job was they thought he had the best plan specifically for DK. And at the same time, none of them said a word about Tyler Lockett. I think that was foreshadowing. I think they were very specific in terms of Jackson, DK, Charles Cross, Geno. This wasn't the word we have the intention of keeping Russell Wilson quote. This was a very specific, detailed answer. So I think if you're hoping they were going to trade DK, I think your window's probably gone. I think if you're hoping they'll keep him, I think you should be pretty excited. They're going to keep him. They need to get that cap number down anyway. And again, I can't reiterate this enough. I'm not a cap expert by any means. I lean on Curtis a lot. I lean on some other guys. I read over the cap a lot. But extending DK Metcalf, everyone focuses on the APY and whatever. That's more of a cash thing. For 2025 specifically, a new contract will actually reduce his cap hit significantly, which gives them more spending room on the cap. So they're motivated to sign him. A lot of people who are around John think the way Mike, apparently Brian and some of the other guys who were around the team were saying like Mike adores DK. And one of the things when Ryan Grubb got fired, he kind of took a shot at Grubb saying, we don't want our best player to just be a guy who draws coverage away. And for the first, before he got hurt, DK was in line with any of the Pro Bowl receivers. That was like the whole thing Grubb's offense was supposed to do. He got hurt. He didn't look like himself. And then his productivity fell off a cliff. So coming out and hearing Mike specifically being like, we need a plan for this player. I don't think with Tyler Lockett going, and it's pretty clear Tyler Lockett's going unless he takes like a bleak minimum deal to stay and redoes his cap number. But I think it's very specific that this is their guy. They want him as part of this group. And if you watch the press conference today, it's so clear.
And also, they've just watched the Super Bowl where A.J. Brown, who's DK Metcalf's BFF, and same draft, same school, Ole Miss, have a great game, accompanied by Devonta Smith and, you know, the two leading receivers. And that's kind of the Eagles' offense with Saquon Barkley. And they're probably thinking, and whether this is right or wrong, Jeff, they're probably thinking Smith and Brown, Jackson Smith and Jigba, DK Metcalf, Dallas Goedert, Noah Fant can maybe play that role. And then, Saquon Barkley, well, okay, no one's going to be Saquon, but we have got an explosive running back in Ken Walker, and maybe we can make him into our version of that. And they're probably sort of seeing how this all pieces together. And then they're saying, okay, what's the big difference? The offensive line. And that's what you've got to improve. And they probably feel as if they do that. And again, this might be misguided. This might be slightly ill-judged from the Seahawks internally. But they might not think they're a million miles behind the Philadelphia Eagles if they can fix that offensive line. They can think, okay, quarterbacks are not, there's not, Jalen Hurts is good, but he's not suddenly Joe Burrow because he's had a good Super Bowl. And we can see a path to sort of emulating them. And that's another reason why I think DK will be here. So to sort of finish things off, I just wanted to sort of talk again about sort of the quarterbacks in the draft, Jeff.
Yeah.
And I've just, the more I've thought about it, the more I think sort of that day 2, whether it is round 2 or round 3, taking it and invest in a quarterback. I think in the previous years, the problem has been they've either picked out of range for the ones they might actually be interested in, and then there's been no middle class. And the one thing about this draft, Jeff, because people keep saying it's a bad quarterback draft, and it's certainly true. There are not sort of 5 first-rounders that you take in any draft class at quarterback. But there is a middle class. There is a group of players who are going to go between rounds 2 and 4. And that's, I think, what the Seahawks are looking for. And then when you think of those players, it's not like Matt Corral, who obviously had his issues. They were never going to take, they want character. They're never going to take someone like that. But the football character of Will Howard, Quinn Ewers, Riley Leonard, Jackson Dart, who neither you or I are a massive fan of, but these are not people who lack for football character. So I do think even Jalen Milroe, whose stock's gone through the toilet, is still of a high character. So all of the players are of a certain character. And I just think, we've talked a bit about Will Howard already. Big, strong, physical, third downs, can work this offense. I do genuinely believe Quinn Ewers was seriously affected by his injuries. The size worries me. The inconsistency worries me. The health record worries me. The arm doesn't worry me. I think he's got a big arm. And I think if you put him in a system with structure, Jeff, I think this is the kind of offense he can succeed. I know some people have said bootlegs, scrambling. Clint Kubiak mentioned scrambling today. It's not his calling card. But if you'd have said 6 weeks ago, what's the system that would be best for Quinn Ewers? I would have said the Brock Purdy system, the Jimmy Garoppolo system. That kind of McVay, Shanahan system would work best. And the Seahawks have that now. So I do think there's a chance that they could go there. You and I have talked about the possibility that John has been just enamored with his upside and talent ever since high school, because a lot of teams will be in that ballpark. There are still people out there saying, I think he's going to go potentially late first, second round when all said and done because of the talent. I don't think that's going to happen. I have him graded in round 3, but I also won't be shocked if it does. And then Riley Leonard, who his accuracy can be patchy, Jeff. It can be all over the place at times, but he really came along in the playoffs. I forgot to mention this earlier with Will Howard. Do you know that Will Howard had like a 97 QBR in his 4 playoff games?
Yep.
Like near perfect.
Yep.
Near perfect, Jeff. And Riley Leonard's was like 89. Again, it was really, really good. So I think you have to give these players credit. And the thing about Riley Leonard is he's not a good athlete, Jeff. He's an unbelievable athlete. The way he runs is an X factor. Like it's more than just athletic quarterback. He's a difference maker with his legs, and he can throw with touch 45 yards downfield. It's the 3rd and 6 that I think you worry a bit with him in the NFL, and the timing and the accuracy. But I do think that he is, again, somebody who John in round 3, let's say, could say, we need to invest in a quarterback. Sam Howell's not the guy. I'm going to draft this guy. And I think it's plausible because he has taken a chance on Howell. He has taken a chance on Drew Lock, on Charlie Whitehurst, on Russell Wilson. Who was short. He's not looking for perfection necessarily, Jeff. I don't think any of these quarterbacks are close to that. But there are quarterbacks in this draft who I think that John Schneider will go, we can take a chance on these guys. And I'm really sure, Jeff, that this is the year that, provided they don't all sort of epically go in the top 25 or something and get snapped up way beyond expectation, I genuinely think they're going to take one of those three in particular to come in and just see if they can have a future with them. Doesn't mean that they're going to get the job. Brian Brom didn't get the job in Green Bay when they took him in round 2. But I think they might take one of these players with the objective of seeing if they can develop.
Yeah, and there isn't a great track record. I know Jalen Hurts was just in the Super Bowl, and he's the best example. But the second round, third round quarterback, we saw the outlier with Russ. And in different offenses, I would have been like, there's no way. In this offense where we've seen that kind of player, Jimmy Garoppolo was a second-round pick. Kirk Cousins was a fourth-round pick. Brock Purdy was a 7. Matt Schaub was a day 2 pick. I think the timing-based offense, and especially in this specific draft class where there's not those first-round dudes. There just isn't. Last year, there were 6 of them. This year, I think there's 2 going to go in the first round, and I think they're both pretty big reaches. They're going to be way overdrafted relative to where they should be. And you saw Dane Brewer's rankings today. Like, he wasn't high in either of them. He had Jackson Dart in the 60s, I think, and that's where I kind of view him. I think the idea of him in the first round.
I'd have him a bit lower.
I would have him lower. I don't know if he'd be on my board. So I think Schneider's going to have a big. I think hiring Kubiak made me think you might be dead on, and I think Kubiak is going to have a big influence in the kind of evaluation that they're going to be making over the next 3 months, and the guys they like. I think those interviews at the combine. I wouldn't be shocked if the coaches are there this time. I think there's going to be a big emphasis on, well, who are the guys he likes, who thinks he can run the offense. He was around Purdy his rookie, his second year, the year they went to the Super Bowl. He did a lot of work in the pass game with Purdy. I'm sure they are going to like some of these guys. And so you look at the track record again, just there isn't a great history. But in this specific offense, there actually is. So, again, it's been weird that Shanahan tree just loves Kirk Cousins to the point where they didn't even study Patrick Mahomes because they thought they were going to get Kirk Cousins. So that was a mistake, obviously. But this offense is more timing-based. Obviously, Schneider's ideal quarterbacks have not been that. I think to get this thing to work, and assuming that Kubiak's going to be around for a while, and I think one of the sneaky pros of kind of his low-energy personality is I don't know if he'll be hired as a head coach anytime soon. And I think they might be able to stick around with this guy for a bit. So I think that kind of plays in their favor. I think we've seen Baltimore with Kubiak, it worked. We talked about Quinn and Shanahan, that worked. I think that's the model of where this team's going to be, the Quinn Shanahan model. Matt Ryan, again, he went 3rd overall, but not a great physical tools guy. He turned, at that point of his career, he had been up and down. I think they are going to like some of those dudes, and I think who Kubiak likes is going to be playing it. Because essentially Howell and Locke were shots, the same kind of shots, and they just haven't worked. John liked Drew Lock more than he should have. He was a tools guy that didn't play quarterback very well. So was Whitehurst. I never understood the Lock thing. Howell, it seems like I would already move on from him. I think he's kind of a wash at this point. So again, I think John's probably getting sick of this year-to-year thing with Geno. They're probably going to have outs in the deal to get out of this thing. I think he's going to keep adding to the room. I think you're right.
So in my last mock, I had Will Howard at 50. How do you think the Seahawks fans will react if that happens?
I think most will hate it. I think most will be pissed off. I think most will think it's a reach. There are some fans I know who listen to your show who would be very excited. Some would be I think Jackson Smith and Jigba would be very excited. I think most Seahawks fans would hate it. I think most guys probably look at this draft class. They look at the history of second-round quarterbacks. They'd probably be like, this is pretty shit. I don't think people loved the Russell Wilson pick at the time.
Well, I mean, Matt Miller definitely didn't because he said it was the worst third-round pick in that entire, or the worst pick.
Peter Schrager laughed at them.
Oh, yeah.
There's that famous clip of my buddy Peter Schrager, who I've been making fun of for 5 years.
He made the only thing he didn't do in that clip was say that he'd spoken to some executives on the phone.
Yeah, so I spoke to Sean McVay, who was a tight end coach, and he hated that.
The thing is, though, is that's the thing that I hope if they do take a quarterback in round 2 or round 3, Jeff, I hope people remember that there was a lot of negativity about the Russell pick. There was a lot of negativity in the media and in the fan base. And then with Jalen Hurts, the Eagles got hammered for that.
I hammered them. I was way off. I hammered them.
And if you remember Hurts, I remember Hurts going to the Senior Bowl, and he was considered like a round 4 type guy, that he just didn't have the X factor. And people thought he had a good job under Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, but everybody does. And he lost to Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama. And then he went to the Senior Bowl, and people were like, "Oh, the arm's a bit better than we thought." And then he went to the Combine. I can remember it like it was yesterday. His throwing session at the Combine was exceptional. Like, he threw it perfectly. And you just start to think, yeah. And there was a bit of buzz then about maybe he could go in round 2. Maybe he could go as high as that. And people were like, nah, he's not going to go in round 2. No chance. And then the Eagles took him. And they got hammered because they had Carson Wentz. And like, what are they doing? Why are they taking him here? Like, Todd McShay hammered the Eagles, did a big thing. Like, what are they doing building around this guy? There were one or two others saying, everybody's on the hot seat now. Howie Roseman, the coaches, everybody is under massive pressure. They've got to find a way to make him a running back because otherwise it's a wasted pick. And it's worked out perfectly for them. They've been to 2 Super Bowls with Jalen Hurts. And it just feels as if the Howards, the Ewers, the Leonards, people like that, similarly, people will go, nah, they haven't got anything. They're not good enough. This guy can't do it. This is a reach. This is a wasted pick. And it doesn't mean that they're going to be Jalen Hurts. But I just remember how people felt about Hurts, Jeff. And I could see the exact same thing happening, that people pan that kind of a pick. And then in a few years, they go, yeah, do you know what? It wasn't too bad, was it? And I just think that could happen. And I do think there's a legit chance when you get to 50, we might hear a quarterback. And people are going to freak out. And especially if it's Quinn Ewers, they're going to freak out. But I think
it's
also
Quinn Ewers, they're definitely going to freak out. I think Howard, some people I know don't like Howard. Some people I know love Howard. But yeah, the Russell reaction at the time, there are a lot of people, these guys don't know what they're doing. They just signed Matt Flynn. Why would people are going to be like, they just signed Geno Smith? Well, why are they drafting a quarterback? Or why are they drafting a quarterback in a shitty draft? What are they doing? I was guilty. I ripped the Eagles for the Jalen Hurts thing, not because I thought a quarterback was a bad idea. I saw Jalen Hurts get benched at Alabama, and I saw him just kind of look like a type B, and then he goes to that gimmicky offense and looks pretty good. And I'm like, this isn't going to work. This guy's not an NFL player. I'm not a scout. I got that wrong. I will take that L all day. And a lot of the analytics people were like, it's always smart. Just draft a quarterback. Like, it's never a bad pick. If he hits, you can trade him. If it works out like they did, they've gone 2 Super Bowls. It's one of the best picks in the last 5 years, probably. Brock Purdy, Jalen Hurts, they're probably some of the best draft picks in the NFL. So just because the fans hate it or the media will be like, man, this is a reach. Some of the Detroit Lions, I hated them taking Jahmyr Gibbs a couple of years ago. I thought that was insane. It's been one of the best picks in the NFL. He's already one of the best players on their team. We get these things wrong. There's a lot of groupthink. There's some of the most hated draft decisions, some of the most liked draft decisions end up being terrible. So if I'm the Seahawks, I'm keeping throwing darts. I think they have to keep throwing. No Jackson dart. But keep putting in, keep taking shots. They got to keep taking shots. We can't come out here and just be like, John Schneider never drafts quarterbacks. It's so frustrating. What are they doing? They haven't taken enough dudes. And then they take one, and now we're going to say it's a bad pick. Like, we're kind of talking at both sides of our mouth here. So I don't think they should do it in the first round. That would be a mistake. But day 2, I think you can convince me, as long as it's not sacrificing offensive linemen, like they took one in day 2 and take a D line and don't take an offensive lineman until round 4, I don't have a hard time with that. But I think they should take quarterbacks. And in this offense, someone could work out that might not work if they were running like the Ryan Grubb shotgun offense, for example.
I think it's very interesting, and I think there's a chance. So we will see how this all plays out over the next few weeks and see if there's any buzz on these guys. Right, just to finish off with 4 super chats. Martin says, I think we go free agent for our left guard and then draft another right guard. Lucas and Cross stay as the tackles. Think need a center, either draft or free agency seems right. I personally would like to see them add an experienced center of some description. I know there's a feeling of Oluwatimi could just do that job. I don't want to just. All I would say about that is, before the season began last season, they felt they needed to replace Oluwatimi with somebody who retired mid-season. So I don't think they have that much faith in him, and I think you need to add somebody else, even if it's a veteran who is capable, who can compete with him. But I'd rather go Drew Dolman, Ryan Kelly, that kind of thing. And the draft, Jeff, for centers is like a barren. It's like the Sahara Desert. It's got a couple of players, and that's it. And then you have the Seth McLaughlin, who's injured. He's got a torn Achilles. Like, he may never play. Like it.
No.
And then, Jonah Monheim in this system could work. He does get beat. He did get beat fairly often in the 1v1s, but then in the game stuff, I thought he looked good. So he might be a day 3 type. You don't want to be relying on the draft sense.
That's the thing. Like, I heard some good things about Monheim. I know, like, Brian, who was down in the Senior Bowl, like what he saw. We did a mock on Saturday. He liked him.
He fits this scheme.
He fits the scheme. But for me, like, do you want to develop a guy in the day 3 and hope to hit, or do you want to have a guy who can come out and do line calls right away and make things easier on Geno? I think that's the point of the scheme. It's supposed to elevate. Sure, you might hit a Monheim. I'd be fine with it, but he kind of feels like Oluwatimi. It's kind of a similar profile of low upside, solid, knows what to do, Remington Award winner. Oluwatimi was that guy and just physically was limited. I don't think you want to go down that well again.
Definitely not. I think Christian Haynes will be the right guard with maybe competition from a veteran, cheap veteran or something. And then I think
him and Lamea probably compete at right guard. Yeah.
I agree with you. And then I think it's where's the splash? Is it Drew Dolman? Is it a guard? What do they do? I tell you what, Jeff, I will say this. I think there's some interesting players in free agency who are not offensive linemen, who they should be ready to move on. If they get 2-3 days in and there's 1 or 2 players who don't have the market they're expecting, I think there's some opportunities in this free agent class because there's some interesting players there at positions that we all wouldn't say they're big needs. But that's often when you can find a lot of good value is you sort of go and attack those players. So I want to look, first and foremost, get an offensive lineman. But once you've done that, get ready because there could be some other players.
There's a lot of defensive tackles in this free agent class. There's some interesting safeties if they move off Rayshon Jenkins. Someone like Hufanga slips through the first day of free agency. You put him in as that kind of weapon and keep Kobe Bryant back there. I'd take a sniff on that.
There are some very interesting players who are not. And look, I think also, Mekhi Becton's had a very good season. I was kind of wondering who's the next Mekhi Becton. It could be Jedrick Wills in Cleveland. Like he's had almost an identical sort of NFL career, really. I mean, probably
same draft.
Same draft. Get him in a guard position instead of tackle, and maybe that is you end up with your own Mekhi Becton. And if you're trying to copy, these guys, and then Dayo Adeyingbo, has got some value there, but is his market quiet because he's had a couple of injuries? Josh Myers has not had the best time at center for the Packers, but can you bring him into the system and work that out? Javon Holland and Andre Sisco, their stock's kind of gone down, but can a coach like Mike McDonald get them going again? Hufanga, who you mentioned, is just a force. I think Milton Williams is a free agent as well.
He is, but he's going to be top 3 paid guys in this class, I think.
I interviewed him, and he was a self-confessed Seahawks fan.
Yeah.
So it would be cool to see him, but I think you're right.
He's going to get it. I think that Super Bowl made him more money than any player on the field.
You got guys like DJ Jones, BJ Hill.
Yeah, he's out there.
Some interesting guys. So it's some opportunities there, to say the least.
I agree.
Darth Soldier says, hope you've all had a great off-season. Do you think DK and Geno stays? Love you, Rob. Love you too, Darth. But we have talked about this. I think they both will stay. If you rewind, I think you sent this right after we finished talking about it, so you probably joined us late. If you rewind the video, you will see Jeff and I talking about it. And then the final 2 from German. It says, hello, Rob and Jeff. I really enjoy your work. Greetings from Argentina. One question. Why does it seem like an idea implanted in fans that you can't pick a quarterback and develop him? What are they waiting for in position 18? A 2-time Heisman winner? And then he goes on to say, bet my life that in this draft, Jordan Love was available at pick 18. We drafted him. The fans would be upset. I don't like him, but you have to try and see if it works or not. Is it the only franchise in which fans don't know the word development? I think there's some very fair points there. I'm not sure at 18 that you do this, but I think this is what we were talking about, Jeff. At 50, it's okay to draft and develop somebody. And this is the point I've been making. Josh Allen had so many holes coming into the league, was far from perfect. And look what he's become. Lamar Jackson was at the end of the first round for a reason. It's not because he was the perfect prospect. Patrick Mahomes went 10th. He didn't go first. Like there were people who just thought, no. Daniel Jeremiah didn't have him in his first round mock at the start of April. He didn't have him in his top 50. So people were not looking at Mahomes going, there's the next legendary quarterback. People were going, too many risks, much of a gunslinger, not sure about that. So these are players that the Joe Burrows who just look the part, play the part, win every game, win the Heisman, throw 60 touchdowns, Jeff, are so few and far between. Typically, you are drafting somebody who has some flaws, and it's how you turn them into a capable player, as the Niners have done with Brock Purdy. And again, this is not a perfect quarterback class, Jeff, but there are players you can invest in. There just are.
Yeah, if you're searching for the perfect quarterback, you're probably never going to find it. Well, Anthony Richardson was like a super fun prospect. I still think he is. He's got tools up the wazoo, but he struggled in the NFL. Some of these guys in the draft, and Mike Tomlin's been on podcasts talking about this, is he hears all these draft people and these fans talk about these guys who come into the league, and we talk about their weaknesses. And it's literally the job of their coach is to improve these guys. And we get so focused on what they're weak at and where their holes are, we kind of forget, like, these guys, they're coaches, they're teachers at the end of the day. Their job is to make people better. And a lot of them are going to be limited in some fashion. And you talked about all the good examples. Purdy was a 7th rounder. There's been so many guys, but Russell Wilson, we've seen the Seahawks really manage his weaknesses really well. And now he's been 2 other places, and they haven't been able to do a good enough job. And it's fallen off a cliff. And that's the job of these guys. You're not going to get the perfect player, especially drafting 18 in each round. But that's where you have to see what someone's strengths are. I know Pete Carroll used to talk about this a lot. What are the strengths? How can we accentuate them? This offense does that for a lot of specific timing-based quarterbacks. Someone like Trey Lance in this scheme didn't work because he's not a timing. He's more of an athletic freak show. A lot of the timing-based guys, and again, I don't think Russell would work in the Kubiak Shanahan offense because he's not a timing-based guy. He throws off schedule. He does his best plays on the run. And a lot of these guys, like Matt Schaub, went elsewhere. He stunk when he left. Jimmy Garoppolo went to the Raiders with McDaniels. He stunk. And so scheme is really important. Player fits are really important. It's not a lot of times not. And the Jordan Love example is really good because that's another one. Everyone crushed them for that. He didn't have a great year this year, frankly, but everyone crushed them. Bo Nix, a lot of people hated Bo Nix. Sean Payton thought he was the perfect guy to run his offense, and he had a great year for relative to what I thought he would be. So, again, a lot of the best quarterback picks were generally panned. So, again, I don't know what Schneider's waiting for, but you look at all these guys that haven't worked out, there's not a lot of things we're banging our heads against the wall. It's hard to find a quarterback. It's the hardest thing in sports, which is why we keep saying, keep taking shots.
Yeah. So there we go. We've sorted it out. This is what you can expect now. We'll see how accurate this is. Geno and DK are going to stay. They're going to sign at least one free agent offensive lineman. And at some point in day 2, they may well draft a quarterback. That's what we're going to go with. So there we go. Big thank you to everybody who has sent super chats in. Really appreciate all of those. Big thank you to Jeff for joining us today. As always love to have Jeff's analysis and great to chat to him and get his thoughts on everything to do with the Seahawks. If you enjoyed this video and you have not yet subscribed, and still 40% of you who watch the videos are not subscribed, please subscribe. Just help get those numbers up. It'd be great to get up towards 10,000 by the draft. They are sort of edging up slowly, but let's see if we can get a few more. Just give us a subscription. It helps the channel. It'd also really help if you would like this video and leave a comment in the comment section, even if you've been very active in the live chat. Even if you just want to say "Go Seahawks" in the comment section, that would be great and it would be a big help. So thank you to everybody who's watching. Really appreciate all the live viewers because there's been loads today. Big thank you for the super chats. Big thank you to all my patrons as well. SeahawksDraftBlog.com, writing so many articles. There's like 4 articles since Sunday alone on the blog right now. So go and scroll down them, check them all out. More streams on the way in the future as well. You'll find everything on SeahawksDraftBlog.com or by subscribing to Rob Staton Football here on YouTube. Until next time, bye for now. Enjoy your week.